Well, I just love the building. I love the building.
It's absolutely lovely. It's in a beautiful setting.
I decided I'd make a habit of walking in through the front door. It's the most beautiful building in Toronto.
Most people are intimidated to even come near this building with the big iron fence around it.
Then they come inside and they just can't believe how beautiful it is.
I just like to see the faces, the astonishment, because the glass, the wood, everything about the building is just not something you run into on a daily basis.
This is a building that has been preserved, and it's worth it.
People say, when was the building last used as a courthouse? On Friday.
It's great to get access to these spaces and explore them.
It's a real treat to be able to open our doors and to offer a little perspective as to what I have the privilege to work in every day.
Doors Open is an event of the City of Toronto, and between 100 and 150 buildings that are not normally open to the public are open for that weekend.
Come on in. It's a great entrance, so once you kind of get past the door and you're in the atrium, then you'll see the grandeur of the building as the crowds come in. Oh wow, it's a great feeling.
Got the light shining from the ceiling and the white stone, so it's really meant to be like the center of the building. The colored tile, it looks very Moorish, but it really goes back to medieval models. The War Memorial for the Second World War is a beautiful statue of a woman holding a baby. It's not so much about mourning the dead, but more about looking towards the future.
I think it's very majestic. It just has a great feeling to it.
Canada celebrated its 150th birthday. It's surprising to know that this building's older than the Confederation itself.
The Law Society of Upper Canada in those days was created in 1797, and they decided to build Osgoode Hall, and it first opened its doors in 1832. Half of the building is owned by the Law Society of Ontario, and the other half is owned by the province. On the government side, it's the Court of Appeal for Ontario and the Superior Court of Justice.
Everybody's been coming into Courtroom 2, excited to have their picture taken, sitting up at the dais so they can pretend they're Court of Appeal judges.
We don't do trials here. We only hear appeals from trials.
There's only one Court of Appeal in the province of Ontario, and that's here in Toronto.
I take great pride in this courtroom. It's one of the architectural treasures of the province.
It's one of 3 courtrooms in Osgoode Hall that's been restored to the way it was at the time of its construction.
At the moment, I'm presiding in Divisional Court. We are dealing with a review of decisions that have been made by others. Obviously, it is not a criminal courtroom because there's no jury box.
Courtroom number 2, it's used for 2 purposes. One week it will be hearing a week of civil appeals. On a criminal week, 1 or 2 murder appeals.
There is a sculpture of a woman who is blindfolded and has scales. We treat everyone who comes before us fairly and equally before the law. Justice is blind.
I love this courtroom in particular. I used to actually litigate here as a lawyer. It always gave me that deep sense of history when I was appearing here as counsel. The leather on top of the counsel tables, the wood carving, the natural light that floods into the courtroom, so wonderful.
If you feel like being a judge, feel free. There's a gown up there and you can sit up in the big chair.
The cases that you're involved in never leave your mind. You're constantly thinking about them. But there's nothing like standing up on your feet and arguing before a bunch of judges.
Toronto is definitely a booming city. There's a lot of new architecture here. It's all very pleasant to come here to the center and see something like this here that's got a lot more character to it.
You have a courthouse on one side and office buildings for the Law Society on the other.
The Law Society of Upper Canada was changed this year to the Law Society of Ontario by statute.
We're in Convocation Room, the boardroom in a sense. The board is called Convocation, and the members of the board are called benchers.
So a bencher is like a director of a company or a board member, except that they're elected by the profession.
The treasurer or president would sit with the group and direct the activities of the day, making policy decisions around the regulation of legal professionals.
This has been used as the meeting room for, I think, well over a century. And in fact, it met in this room until September 2016, after which I decided the room was too small.
And there are a lot of wonderful oil paintings around the room, all of which are former treasurers, and most of the ones here in the room today are still active in the business of convocation.
Lori Politza is only our 3rd woman treasurer. She's got a cow by her right hand. She hails from Saskatchewan. Mr. Conway, he was a tweeter.
The chair that the treasurer president sits in dates back to 1860.
You can see it's got a crown on the top. When the Prince of Wales attended, it may well have been constructed or ordered for that occasion.
The table, I think, was made for somebody else who didn't like it, and then the Law Society got it for a special deal.
Our first treasurer was killed in a duel because he insulted his mistress. It's never a good idea. And it's another one that sank on the ship. It was dangerous being a treasurer in those days.
This is the bencher's reception. It's actually quite nice that it's open to the public during doors open, because this is an area that is not seen by the public very often. This is the bencher's space.
Even with the renovation, they are keeping the way that it was before, so which is really important because it's part of the history, right?
Some people ask if they can sit in the furniture because it looks very delicate, and something maybe that they would see in very old European building.
So on the left we have Robert Baldwin, who's one of the earlier treasurers of the Law Society. And then we have Louis Lafontaine, basically the founders of responsible government in Ontario.
The Law Society decided to build Osgoode Hall because they needed office space, but they also needed a library.
This is the Great Library. This is the main reading room of the Great Library. It houses the Canadian law collection.
So this statue here is actually a memorial, and it's a list of all the lawyers that gave their lives during World War I. It was erected in 1928, so that's why it actually says the Great War and not World War I.
This is my favorite room. It's called the American Room because back in the 1800s, not many people went to court. In that case, they decided to refer to American and British law. Everything in this room, it is original.
The spiral staircase, it's a cast iron staircase, and it's beautiful and terrifying. If you have to go up that thing with a pile of books, it's really scary.
There's some ghost stories associated with the Law Society building.
I heard like a sneeze or something. I looked around because there was no one around. Oh, and I got this sort of cold feeling.
I try to stay away from the ghost stories.
You know, I'm not sure whether I really believe it or not, but there are several stories that keep on coming up, and one of them has to do with a man who's studying in the library. It was seen 50 years ago by the librarian who came in on a Sunday.
And the guy got up from the desk and then walked through a wall. It was someone dead doing research.
I keep on telling people that if they meet one of the ghosts, let me know, because I'd like to ask them a few questions.
Yeah, this year the theme is movies.
And I think one of the most notable ones, the movie Chicago, they've used the American Room as part of the prison.
The Time Traveler's Wife. There's a scene also from Mimic.
Anne of Green Gables.
You're like, hey, I work there, so it's kind of interesting to see that, you know.
Right now, I am showcasing the Convocation Hall, which is built in 1881, and it was originally used for lectures, examinations, and originally where Call to the Bar happened. This room now is used as a restaurant, and they make a mean steak frites. That's just my personal preference.
Features like the stained glass windows, for example, are fairly recent. They represent the heritage of law in Canada.
It is really important to have public buildings that reflect the seriousness and the investment in our public infrastructure.
The Law Society governs a profession in the public interest. We're here for them.
We have about 15,000 people last year, and we were expecting at least the same for this year also.
You get a lot of people from out of town who come through and just are amazed by the friendliness of the people, the history.
Really interesting questions and comments coming from the public.
My father is a retired lawyer. He brought me in. I was excited to see it a second time because it's an old memory now. Thanks for opening up the doors, yeah.
It's wonderful to work in a place where the heritage of the building is so well respected and cherished.
I very often walk right outside the front door, turn around, and look at what a beautiful place I work in.
And to think about the fact that it's been here for well over 100 years, I just love being a part of that.
You go in and you're thinking about your next meeting, your next phone call, and you don't really notice it. And quite honestly, Doors Open is a good way to rekindle my love story with Osgoode Hall.
It's a very special historical piece of Toronto.